Let's continue our series this morning considering the question, who are you? Because as we've been looking at, you are not what you do, you are not what you have, and you are not what people say about you. My favourite person in the Bible is Moses. Moses is born as an Israelite boy into slavery in Egypt. At the time, the king had issued an order that said that any baby boy that was born needs to be thrown into the Nile to be drowned, because Pharaoh realised the Israelite slaves were growing in number and he can't have a slave revolt on his hands. So this is population control. He makes this law. Now, understandably, Moses' mum can't go through with this. So she puts Moses in a basket that floats and she floats it down the Nile. And Moses is found, remarkably, by Pharaoh's daughter. She has sympathy on this little baby boy. A long story short, Pharaoh's daughter adopts Moses, so he spends the first 40 years of his life living in riches as Pharaoh's adopted grandson, while his true people, the Israelites, are now Moses' slaves. In other words, for 40 years of his life, he is pretending to be something he's not. He's a slave pretending to be a prince. There's nothing heroic about that. But because of that, we can relate. I wonder how many of us have felt like that at times. If only a matter of time maybe before people discover the real me. And when they do, they probably won't like me anymore. Moses knew what that felt like. It gets worse though for Moses, because Moses is out walking one day and he sees an Egyptian who's beating an Israelite slave. I don't know what happened to Moses, but he snaps. I don't know if he's maybe sick of pretending to be someone he's not. Maybe he thought, this is my opportunity to be a hero. This is my opportunity to show people who I really am. But he snaps and he sees red and he kills the Egyptian and he buries him in the sand. So now Moses is also a murderer, and there's nothing heroic about that. But because of that, we can relate, maybe not to being a murderer. I'm sure we can't. But do you know how many times have we done the right thing, but maybe we've done it in the wrong way, and it's blown up in our face? Moses knew what that felt like, and of course, it gets even worse. Pharaoh eventually discovers that Moses has killed someone, and Pharaoh can't have his grandson Moses leading an Israelite revolt. So he issues an order for Moses to be killed. And what does Moses do? Does he use his power and position to stand up for his people? Does he lead the Israelites into a full-scale revolt? No. Moses just runs away. He's scared, so he runs away and he goes to a far away place and he hides away and he gets married and he becomes a shepherd. Moses is a coward, and there's nothing heroic about that. But because of that, we can relate. You see, Moses knew what it felt like to pretend. Moses knew what it felt like to mess up big time. Moses knew what it was like to run away scared. And that actually becomes the next 40 years of his life. He just sulks around feeling sorry for himself as a shepherd. And as an 80-year-old man doing a job designed for teenage boys, and he's hated by everyone, hated by the Israelites for being an imposter, hated by the Egyptians for being a murderer, and hated by himself for being a coward. This is who Moses is. Here's the amazing thing. Of all the people, God decides to speak to Moses. From a burning bush one day. So one day he's out and about looking after his sheep, and then suddenly he sees this interesting thing, and it's a bush on fire. But the bush isn't burning up. So Moses does what any man would do. He thought, I will go over and see that strange sight. Translation, Moses is just a normal bloke. And just like every other man I've ever met, he loves messing around with fire. And he walks towards it. But as Moses gets closer to the bush starts to talk to him. And that's a trip. The bush says, hey Moses. And he's probably thinking, what the is going on? And the bush starts to speak to him and he says, hey Moses. He kind of timidly raises his hand. He says, yeah, that's me, here I am. He has no idea what's going on. And he knows, and all he knows is that the bush on fire is talking to him. He's probably thinking, I've got to lay off eating all those wild mushrooms. And that's when the voice finally says and introduces itself to Moses. The voice says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and of Jacob. In other words, I'm the God of your true people, the Israelites. And at this, he hides his face. He's afraid to look at God. He's terrified. And you would be too, because Moses assumes that he's in big trouble right now. You've got to remember, he's a pretender. He's a murderer, and he's a coward. And he's been a shepherd for the last 40 years. And he's thinking to himself, this is it. I've been running from God and his people all my life, and finally he's caught up with me. And this is game over. Nothing heroic about that. But I'm sure we can relate. How many of us have ever had that thought? If God is real, then he must be very, very, very angry with me. But God doesn't punish or shame Moses. Instead, God shares a plan with Moses. And it's crazy, awesome, heroic plan. And he says to Moses, Moses, I've not given up on you. And I've not given up on my people. I've been with them through all their slavery. But now it's time to rescue. Now I'm going to save them. And here's the deal, Moses. I'm going to do all of that through you. And this, of course, freaks him out. Because God is not here to punish him. Instead, he's here saying, I've chosen you. Moses, the least qualified person I can think of, to lead his people out of freedom. A guy that I personally wouldn't follow to the front door, not right now. And here's the truth. God shows up. You see, God sort of moved on. God maybe should have picked someone else. So God shares this crafty plan with Moses. And what Moses' response is this. Well, don't forget, Moses is a coward. So he gives a bunch of excuses of why God has picked the wrong person. And as we look at these, I think we must just see something of ourselves in Moses. I know I certainly do. You see, so often I come up with those excuses. Here's God's epic plan, and here's Moses' excuse. First one is this: God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? I expect we've all said some version of this before. God, who am I? In other words, God, I'm not enough. I'm not capable or strong enough. Just fill in the blanks. You picked the wrong person, God. Pick someone else. I love God's response. Moses says, who am I? And God doesn't answer this question. And God just says this: I'll be with you. I love that. You see, it doesn't matter who you are. It matters who I am. That's what God is saying. And God is saying, I'm going to be with you. And Moses hears this, and then he says to himself, God, here's another excuse. Secondly, Moses says, who are you? You said it's going to be fine because you're going to be with me. But God, I don't know you. So who are you? Are you strong enough to set these people free? Moses challenges God, which is not a smart move. But God says, and stays patient with him, and he says in his response, he says, Moses, who am I? I am king. I'm king of everything. I will be king of everything until the end of time. So yeah, I'll set my people free. And actually, I'm going to give them a new land that's even better than Egypt. And even though the Egyptians will resist, I'm going to strike their land with plagues and stuff. So at the end of it, they're also going to turn to me, and they're going to see that I am the one true king, and they're going to worship me. So Moses, who am I? I'm God, king of everything. I will do all of that. I will do all of that through you. This is awesome. Moses should be beating his chest and charging into Egypt, but instead, do you know what? Moses looks at the God of the universe after that speech, and he goes, yeah, that's a cool speech, but back to the matter at hand, God. And his third excuse is this: what if they don't believe me? You see, right now I'm picturing God just kind of rolling his eyes, and I wonder if he really shouldn't look somewhere else. But he stays patient with him, and he gives Moses a set of miraculous signs to give physical authority to his words. Crazy stuff like his shepherd's staff turning into a snake and then back again. Weird stuff like that. What's Moses' response? Well, he looks at God and he goes, those are very cool magic tricks, thank you, but I've never been eloquent, neither in the past and certainly not now. And so his fourth excuse is this: I'm slow of speech and young. In other words, he goes, I'm not quick-witted. I'm not great at giving speeches like you are. So listen, you've picked the wrong person. Moses is just being annoying now. And yet God stays patient with him. And he basically replies, Moses, I made your mouth. I know what I'm working with here. I know the kind of speeches you give. It's a bit like a lame one you're giving right now. So listen to me. I'll do all the heavy lifting. All you've got to do is to walk into Egypt. And this is where Moses gives his final attempt to dodge God. And it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And he looks at God of the universe, speaking to him out of a burning bush. And he just finally says his last excuse, Lord, just send someone else. Which is followed by the biggest understatement in the Bible, I think. It says that God's anger finally burnt against Moses. And Moses must have felt it because he finally stops arguing with God. He puts his shoes on and he walks towards Egypt. The pretender, the murderer and the coward, the least qualified leader available, is off to set an entire nation free from slavery. So after the past few weeks, as we've considered the question, who am I? I've suggested these things, that you're not what you do. You're not what you have. And you're not what people say about you. And I think that Moses' story tells us a lot of these answers. You see, he has numerous excuses. When God comes and speaks to Moses, he brings these excuses. He says, who am I? He says to God, who are you? He says, no one else will believe me. I can't speak well enough. Send someone else. But as we've seen with David, God doesn't see us the way the world sees us. As we've learnt from Jacob, we can pretend all we want, but God knows who we really are. And Moses' life shows us that no matter what we've done, how long we've run away, God doesn't leave us where we are. So as we come to the end of this mini-series, let's finish with the question we started with. Who are you? You're not what you do, you're not what you have, and you're not what people say you are. Because in God you can find a new identity, a new you, a real you, and a you with purpose. Who are you?